Rome does not sense an ending tonight. Lamps dim out of habit, gates close by routine, and guards step into darkness not to save history, but to finish their shift awake. Many listen quietly here night after night. If this calm travels with you, you may stay. Subscribing keeps this silence alive. The quiet authority of standing still. The guard does not move because movement is not the point. He stands because standing is what prevents explanation from becoming necessary. In the logic of late Rome, stillness is not absence of action, but a deliberate technique, a way of convincing the night that it does not need to escalate into something memorable. Power here is not loud enough to announce itself, and that is intentional. Earlier centuries taught Rome how to advance, roads, legions, borders that kept shifting outward as if the world itself were slightly too small. But this night belongs to a different kind of lesson. Expansion has become exhausting. The city has learned that holding ground requires more patience than taking it. So the guard stands still, feet planted on stones, worn smooth by generations who once marched with more ambition than caution. Standing watch is not a display. There is no choreography. No one pauses to admire posture or uniform. The authority comes from predictability. The guard is always there, and because he is always there, people behave as if order exists, even when it is barely enforced. Rome understands this psychology very well. It has practiced it for centuries. Fear is expensive. Habit is efficient. The guard's stillness is misread by outsiders as weakness. From a distance, it looks like hesitation. From within the city, it feels like reassurance. The lamp beside him burns steadily, not brightly. Its purpose is not to illuminate the empire, but to confirm that someone remembered to light it. That small confirmation carries more weight than a parade. At this stage, Roman authority does not chase disorder. It waits for disorder to think better of itself. The guard knows which alley encourages trouble and which merely collects echoes. He does not rush to intervene. He becomes visible. Visibility is often enough. Most people do not want to be noticed by someone whose job is to notice. There is a quiet irony in this arrangement. The greatest imperial system the Mediterranean ever knew now relies on the psychology of embarrassment. Not punishment, not spectacle, just the mild discomfort of being seen by someone who has nowhere else to be. The guard's power lies in his availability. He is inconvenient to wrongdoing simply because he is present. Rome's authority at night has learned restraint. It no longer assumes that force is persuasive. Instead, it trusts repetition. The guard stands here every night. Therefore, this place is watched. Therefore, behavior adjusts. This chain of reasoning is so deeply ingrained that no one remembers when it began. And that is precisely why it works. Standing still also conserves energy. The empire is careful now. It does not spend effort where effort will not yield results. There is no sprinting through the streets, no dramatic confrontations unless absolutely required. The guard walks his route slowly, then stops again, letting the city settle around him like dust. Movement is measured because urgency is expensive. This is not laziness. It is budgeting. Rome has entered an age where power must justify itself quietly. Loud authority invites testing. Quiet authority invites acceptance. The guard understands this intuitively. He does not need philosophy to tell him that people behave differently when watched calmly rather than chased aggressively. Calm suggests confidence. Confidence discourages challenges. The most conservative act an empire can perform is to refuse to react. Reaction implies vulnerability. Standing still implies that nothing significant has changed. And so the guard becomes a symbol not of strength, but of continuity. He suggests that tonight is sufficiently similar to last night to require no innovation. There is something faintly humorous about the seriousness with which this stillness is taken. The guard's task is to prevent events that would later be described as important. His success ensures that nothing worth narrating happens. If he performs well, history has less to say. Rome rewards him with another shift. The city has grown comfortable with this arrangement. Residents expect the guard to be there not because they consciously think about safety, but because his presence has become part of the environment, like walls or drains or the sound of footsteps at a certain hour. When something is reliable enough, it stops being noticed. Standing still also creates the illusion of permanence. The guard appears unchanged night after night, even though he ages, tires, and eventually is replaced. The position remains. Rome values positions more than individuals. That is how it has survived as long as it has. People come and go. Posts endure. The guard does not need to understand imperial theory to embody it. His stillness communicates a message that words would only complicate. Nothing urgent is happening. Nothing requires panic. Go home, sleep. Tomorrow will resemble today closely enough to be manageable. This message is not always true, but it is often true enough. Rome's authority has become subtle to the point of invisibility. It no longer needs to prove itself nightly. Proof is exhausting. Instead, it relies on the accumulated weight of evenings that passed without incident. Each uneventful night reinforces the assumption that the next will behave similarly. The guard's stillness is also a form of trust. Trust that the city understands the rules. Trust that most people prefer stability to chaos. Trust that small infractions can be absorbed without unraveling the whole. This trust is not naive. It is calculated. Rome has run the numbers across centuries. From time to time, the stillness is tested. A raised voice, a sudden movement. The guard shifts his weight, turns his head, lets the lamp catch his profile. Often that is enough. The situation dissolves. Authority resumes its quiet shape. Standing guard is therefore not passive. It is a conversation without words. The city speaks through habit. The guard listens through stillness. Together they maintain an agreement that no longer needs to be signed. In earlier ages, Rome celebrated motion, marching columns, expanding borders. Now it celebrates equilibrium, even if it never says so out loud. To remain where you are, unchanged, is a radical ambition for something once obsessed with growth. The guard stands because the empire has decided that tonight does not require ambition. Tonight requires balance. The act of standing still becomes the most conservative expression of power imaginable. It preserves what exists rather than reaching for what might. And so the night passes. Not because the guard chased danger away, but because danger saw no reason to arrive. Who watched the watchers? Trust in Rome does not behave like belief. It does not rise or fall dramatically, and it does not ask to be renewed. It settles instead like dust on familiar surfaces, accumulating slowly until no one remembers when it first appeared. People do not trust the night guards because they admire them. They trust them because the city has trained them to expect that someone is always watching, even if that someone is tired, distracted, or thinking about supper. Not everyone is convinced. Some residents glance at the guards with mild skepticism, the kind reserved for institutions that have lasted too long to feel impressive. The guards are visible, but visibility does not always equal confidence. A man standing still can look dependable or ornamental, depending on how many years the city has leaned on him without asking questions. Rome at this stage is not governed primarily by law. Law exists, certainly, written and archived and quoted when necessary, but daily life moves according to something quieter and far more durable, which is order. Order is learned, not enforced. Children grow up knowing when shops close, which streets grow loud at night, and which corners invite attention they would rather avoid. By the time they are adults, this knowledge feels natural, as if the city itself had explained everything gently while no one was listening. The guard is only the visible surface of this arrangement. He is what order looks like when it needs a human outline. Beneath him stretches a layered system of habit, expectation, memory, and shared fatigue. Most nights the system runs without requiring his intervention. His presence confirms that the system still exists. That confirmation is usually enough. There is a subtle humor in how little people actually think about who watches the watchers. The question itself feels theoretical, the sort of thing discussed in daylight conversations by those who are paid to worry. At night, concern dissolves into assumption. Someone must be responsible. Someone always has been. The guard is there, therefore the responsibility must rest with him. This logic is rarely examined because it has worked for as long as anyone can remember. Rome does not collapse from neglect in a single moment. It softens. Responsibility becomes abstract. Each layer of the system trusts the one beneath it to continue functioning. The guard trusts the city to behave. The city trusts the guard to notice problems. Administrators trust reports that say nothing happened. Nothing happens because everyone is trusting something else to remain intact. This is not stupidity. It is efficiency pushed to its limit. The residents do not demand proof that the guards are effective. Proof would require disruption. Instead, they accept calm as evidence. If the night is quiet, the system must be working. If something does go wrong, it is treated as an exception rather than a signal. Rome has grown skilled at absorbing exceptions without rethinking the whole. The guards themselves are aware of this fragile balance, though they would never phrase it that way. They sense that their authority is borrowed, not owned. It comes from the city's willingness to believe in continuity rather than from fear of punishment. This makes their role strangely delicate. Too much intervention would feel intrusive. Too little would feel negligent. So they aim for an in-between state that feels almost like absence. The question of who watches them remains unanswered because it rarely needs to be answered. Supervision exists somewhere, theoretically, but theory is enough. The empire has learned that explicit oversight is not always necessary when everyone behaves as if oversight exists. This is governance by suggestion, and Rome has perfected it. People obey routines more reliably than rules. Rules require attention. Routines require memory. Memory is easier to maintain when it is shared. The city breathes together at night, slowing collectively, trusting that the rhythm will carry them to morning without interruption. There is irony in the fact that an empire built on surveillance and administration eventually learns to rely on mutual assumption. Paperwork still exists, but it no longer drives the night. What drives the night is expectation. The expectation that someone else has already thought about this. The expectation that responsibility has been assigned somewhere beyond immediate view. Rome fades, not because its guards disappear, but because belief in singular responsibility dissolves. When everyone assumes that order is someone else's task, order becomes weightless. It still exists, but it floats rather than anchors. The city does not notice this change immediately because floating feels lighter than holding. The guard stands within this invisible exchange, both trusted and doubted, both essential and easily overlooked. He knows that people do not rely on him personally. They rely on the idea that the post will be filled. If he were replaced tomorrow, the night would feel the same. That knowledge is oddly comforting and faintly unsettling. Authority here has become impersonal by design. Rome learned long ago that individuals fail, tire, age, and complain. Systems endure. The guard is a placeholder for endurance. He does not need to be exceptional. He needs to be replaceable. And yet, in this replaceability lies a quiet vulnerability. When everyone is replaceable, responsibility loses its edge. The system depends on participation without reflection. It works beautifully until it doesn't, and when it doesn't, no one can point to a single moment when the watching stopped. The city sleeps because it has always slept. The guards watch because they always have. The administrators assume reports will arrive in the morning stating that nothing required attention. This circular confidence sustains Rome far longer than ambition ever could. But it also dulls awareness. Who watches the watchers is a question Rome answers indirectly by refusing to ask it out loud. Asking would imply doubt, and doubt would disrupt sleep. The empire prefers rest to interrogation. It trusts continuity more than vigilance. So the night passes again. The guards remain visible enough to reassure and invisible enough to avoid scrutiny. The system hums quietly, powered by habit rather than conviction. Rome does not fall asleep because it is careless. It falls asleep because it has learned that staying awake forever is unsustainable. It delegates attention the way it once delegated power, outward and downward, until no single person feels the full weight of keeping the city intact. And for a long time, this works. Not because someone is always watching, but because everyone believes that someone is. Streets that no longer expected celebration. Night in Rome once carried an expectation of noise, not chaos, but presence, voices drifting late, laughter stretching longer than intended, footsteps that lingered because there was no urgent reason to go home. That expectation has softened, not vanished dramatically, not forbidden, simply worn down by repetition and restraint until the streets learned a new habit, which is to quiet themselves earlier without complaint. This is not because joy has been outlawed. No decree announces that celebration is finished. The city simply stops anticipating it. People no longer wait for the night to surprise them. They plan their evenings with modest horizons, A meal, a conversation, a door closing at a reasonable hour. The streets absorb this shift gently, the way stone absorbs heat during the day and releases it slowly after sunset. The guards walk these streets with a particular awareness. They remember routes that once stayed busy longer. They recognize corners that used to collect voices well past dusk. Now those corners collect echoes instead. Not sad echoes, not ominous ones, just the sound of space, doing what space does when people leave it alone. Rome at night has learned efficiency. Lights are fewer, doors close with less ceremony, windows darken one by one, not as a sign of fear, but of practicality. There is work in the morning. Bodies need rest. The city has decided that staying awake is no longer a virtue. This is often misunderstood as decline. Outsiders might label it poverty or decay, imagining that silence must be forced or unwanted. But silence here feels negotiated, chosen. People are not driven indoors by desperation. They go willingly, guided by fatigue that has accumulated slowly across generations, who learned that excess eventually charges interest. The guards do not interpret the quiet as absence. They interpret it as cooperation. Fewer people on the streets means fewer chances for friction. Less friction means fewer interruptions to the night. The system prefers nights that do not require reports. There is a quiet humor in how seriously this reduced expectation is taken. The city once staged spectacles capable of distracting entire populations. Now it congratulates itself on nights where nothing unexpected occurs. Success is measured in the lack of stories. The streets themselves seem to participate in this agreement. They do not invite lingering. They do not glow. They guide movement forward rather than outward. You pass through them rather than stay within them. The architecture remains impressive and solid, but it no longer performs. It supports rather than impresses. The guard passes storefronts that are already closed, not hurriedly, but decisively. Merchants know the rhythm. Staying open longer does not attract more customers, only more fatigue. This knowledge has been tested enough times to become instinct. The city runs on instinct, now more than ambition. It is tempting to romanticize the earlier nights, to imagine Rome when darkness brought energy rather than quiet. But romance requires surplus, and surplus has been carefully rationed. What remains is endurance. Endurance prefers sleep. The guard understands that his role here is less about protection and more about confirmation. He confirms that the night has behaved as expected, that the streets have learned their lesson and do not demand attention, that nothing has erupted into significance. He walks past homes where families have already settled into silence. Inside there is no sense of loss. No one is counting what the night used to offer. They are counting hours of rest. The future has been reduced to manageable size, and that reduction feels like relief. This is not poverty. Poverty announces itself loudly. Poverty creates urgency. This is something subtler. This is weariness that has been institutionalized, the kind that does not protest because it has learned the cost of resistance. The city is not broken. It is tired in an organized way. Rome has lived through enough excitement to know that excitement is expensive. The streets reflect this wisdom. They no longer expect celebration to rescue them from monotony. They accept monotony as stability's quieter cousin. The guard notices how footsteps sound different now, not hurried, not joyful, just purposeful. People are not avoiding each other. They simply have destinations that do not include lingering. Even conversations feel shorter, more complete. Nothing is left hanging that needs to be resolved in the dark. There is something gently ironic in the fact that a city famous for its public life now values privacy so highly. Doors matter more than plazas. Interiors matter more than streets. The night belongs to households, not crowds. The streets do not resent this. They rest. Stone cools. Dust settles. Lamps hold steady without competing with noise. The city breathes slower, and the guards adjust their pace accordingly. If there is sadness here, it is unperformed. No one mourns openly. Mourning would imply comparison, and comparison would require remembering how things used to feel. Rome prefers the present tense. It is easier to manage. Generational fatigue is invisible because it does not arrive all at once. Each generation carries a little less expectation into the night, and by the time anyone notices, the adjustment feels natural. The streets reflect this inheritance. They have inherited restraint. The guard does not judge this change. Judgment would require nostalgia. Nostalgia is heavy. He carries enough already. He walks through a city that has learned to lower its volume without being asked. Nothing about this quiet feels temporary. It feels settled. The night does not wait for something to happen. It waits for morning. And that, perhaps, is the clearest sign of Rome's condition. Not collapse, not crisis, just a city that has stopped expecting the night to entertain it and has asked it instead to pass cleanly, efficiently, without incident. The streets agree. Walls built for memory, not war. The walls are still there, and that fact alone seems to satisfy everyone involved. They rise without urgency, without explanation, and without any visible expectation that they will be tested tonight. Stone does not ask why it was stacked. It only asks whether it will be maintained. Rome answers by continuing to repair what already exists, rather than imagining what might be needed next. These walls were once arguments. They declared intention. They said something about permanence and threat and readiness. Now they function more like punctuation, marking the edge of the city without insisting on confrontation. They outline rather than intimidate. They remind rather than challenge. The guard knows this difference instinctively. He does not touch the wall expecting reassurance. He touches it the way one touches a familiar surface, checking that it remains where it should be. The wall's presence is comforting not because it promises victory, but because it promises delay. Delay is valuable. Delay creates time. Time allows people to sleep. Rome no longer builds walls because it fears an immediate enemy. It builds them because it has always built them. The habit has outlived the panic that once justified it. Stonework continues because stonework has always continued. There is no meeting where someone asks whether walls are still relevant. Relevance would require imagination, and imagination is tired. The wall is memory made physical. Each layer carries the weight of decisions made by people who believed tomorrow would resemble today closely enough to justify reinforcement rather than reinvention. This belief has been rewarded often enough to become policy. The guard understands that walls do not stop history. History is not impressed by stone. History is patient. It waits. The wall's real function is to slow that patience just enough to make the night manageable. It does not promise safety forever. It promises inconvenience to whatever wishes to intrude before dawn. There is something faintly humorous in how seriously these walls are respected, even when no one can remember the last time they mattered in the way they were designed to. People move through gates as if the gates themselves are performing work. The ritual persists even when the reason has blurred. Rome has learned that rituals can substitute for confidence. At night, the walls cast long shadows that feel heavier than the stone itself. These shadows are not threatening. They are reassuringly predictable. They fall in the same places every evening. The guard learns their shapes the way others learn the layout of rooms. Familiarity replaces fear. Maintenance has become the city's primary defense, not against enemies, but against surprise. Cracks are filled. Loose stones are reset. The act of repair carries its own logic. If something is maintained, it must still be useful. If it is useful, then the effort was justified. Rome circles this reasoning comfortably. The walls do not speak of conquest anymore. They speak of continuity. They say that someone cared enough to keep them standing, that someone is often unnamed, unpaid in memory, and forgotten by daylight. But the wall remembers their labor, even if history does not. The guard walks alongside these structures knowing that his presence and theirs serve similar purposes. He delays. They delay. Together they create a buffer between the city and whatever it prefers not to think about tonight. This cooperation does not require enthusiasm. It requires consistency. Rome has reached an age where confidence expresses itself as inertia. Change would require explanation. Explanation would require energy. The walls eliminate the need for both by existing stubbornly, refusing to invite questions. There is irony in how much effort is invested in slowing what cannot be stopped. But Rome has never tried to stop time. It has tried to manage it, to schedule it, to convince it to arrive gradually rather than all at once. Walls are excellent for this purpose. They do not argue with inevitability. They negotiate with it. The guard knows that the wall will not save the city if something truly determined arrives. He also knows that truly determined things rarely arrive without warning. Most threats are casual, curious, opportunistic. Walls discourage curiosity. They make opportunity less convenient. For a single night, inconvenience is enough. The city sleeps behind these walls without gratitude. Gratitude would require awareness. Awareness would suggest danger. Instead, the walls fade into the background of trust. They become part of the city's furniture, as unremarkable as thresholds and drains. Generations have grown up assuming the walls will be there. They do not imagine alternatives. The walls shape thought as much as they shape movement. They teach the city where it ends and where it does not need to worry about what lies beyond until morning. The guard pauses near a section recently repaired. The stone smells faintly of fresh work. Someone cared recently? That knowledge is oddly comforting. It suggests that continuity is still an active project, not merely a remembered one. Rome's walls no longer perform heroics. They perform patience. They accept that history will arrive eventually and content themselves with making it late. This is not weakness, it is strategy. The city understands that it cannot outrun change, but it can make change wait outside until business hours. Walls exist to enforce this courtesy. So the night continues, the walls hold, the guard walks. Nothing presses urgently against the stone. History remains on the other side, unoffended but delayed. And for this night, that delay is enough. The night shift of an empire past its peak. The night shift is where power loses its voice, not because it has vanished, but because speaking would require effort that no longer feels necessary. Daytime authority performs. It announces, it reassures crowds that something meaningful is underway. At night, authority stops pretending to be impressive and focuses instead on remaining upright until morning. This is where Rome is most honest. There are no speeches after dark, no banners catch the lamplight, no one salutes ideals. What remains is temperature, friction, and repetition. Cold air settles into stone. Leather softens and cracks. Boots wear down unevenly because streets are never as flat as maps suggest. Power, stripped of ceremony, becomes a body doing a job it has done many times before. The guards understand that night is where empires admit their limits. During the day, Rome can still gesture toward greatness. It can point to monuments, laws, memories. At night, none of that matters. The city needs someone awake. That is the requirement. Everything else is optional. Night duty exposes what authority actually costs. Not gold or rhetoric, but endurance, staying alert when nothing happens, repeating routes that change very little, trusting that boredom itself is evidence of success. This is not glamorous labor. That is precisely why it is reliable. Rome enters the night shift without ambition. Ambition would imply future expansion. Expansion requires confidence. Confidence requires rest. The empire has learned to ration confidence carefully. It spends most of it during daylight. At night it conserves. The guards do not feel powerful. They feel responsible. Responsibility is heavier but quieter. It does not demand recognition. It demands presence. The city relies on them not to act decisively, but to remain available. Availability is a form of strength rarely celebrated because it cannot be dramatized. There is mild irony in how naked authority becomes once the audience leaves. Without crowds, power shrinks to its essentials. A person, a route, a lamp, a watchful pause at intersections where sound travels differently after dark. Rome has no illusions about this. It knows that the night will not amplify its image. The night will test whether anything remains when image is removed. The answer is repetition. The guard's footsteps become the only rhythm that matters. They mark time more effectively than any clock. Each pass through the same street confirms that the city is still there, still recognizable, still cooperating. This cooperation is fragile but sufficient. The empire at night does not attempt to inspire. Inspiration is volatile. It raises expectations. Expectations lead to disappointment. The night shift prefers modest goals. Keep things quiet, keep fires from spreading, keep people moving homeward, keep the city intact enough to hand over to daylight without apology. This is where Rome is most vulnerable and therefore most truthful. Vulnerability removes exaggeration. It forces clarity. The guard knows exactly what he can and cannot do. He cannot prevent history. He cannot revive enthusiasm. He cannot solve problems that belong to the generations. He can stand, he can walk, he can notice. That is enough. Daylight hides weakness behind structure. Night reveals structure without decoration. The empire looks smaller in the dark, but also more coherent. What remains is not an idea, but a routine. Routines endure longer than ideas because they do not ask to be believed. They only ask to be repeated. There is something faintly humorous in how little is expected of the night shift and how much depends on it. If nothing happens, success is assumed. If something does happen, it is framed as an exception rather than a verdict. The night absorbs blame gently, like stone absorbing heat. The guards share a quiet understanding that they are not preserving greatness. They are preserving normality. Normality does not attract historians. It attracts people who want to wake up tomorrow and recognize their surroundings. Rome no longer needs to prove itself. Proof would require comparison with a past it can no longer fully reproduce. Instead, it demonstrates competence through continuity. The night shift embodies this philosophy perfectly. It does not seek applause, it seeks dawn. There is honesty in exhaustion. When power is tired, it stops lying to itself. It admits that its reach is shorter than its memory. The guards feel this in their legs, their shoulders, their patience. None of this diminishes their role, it clarifies it. The empire in the night shift is not dramatic. It is practical. It does not ask what it means to be Rome. It asks whether the lamp is still lit and whether the street remains passable. Identity is postponed until morning. The city entrusts its most unguarded hours to people who are not asked to feel important. This is deliberate. Self-importance complicates tasks that require steadiness. The night shift strips authority down to something almost humble. The guards walk without illusion. They know the empire has passed its peak. Peaks are noisy, peaks attract attention. Night prefers plateaus, stable ground, predictable slopes. Rome has chosen to live here now. And so the night continues, honest in its simplicity. No speeches, no symbols, just breath in cold air, worn soles on stone, and footsteps repeating until repetition itself feels like reassurance. This is not the empire at its strongest. It is the empire at its clearest. Fire, theft, and ordinary fear. The greatest danger Rome expects tonight does not arrive on horseback. It does not announce itself with horns or banners. It does not care about borders. It fits inside a clay lamp, a careless hand, a loose word spoken too loudly after too much wine. The empire, for all its history of defending against grand threats, now spends its nights worrying about things small enough to be embarrassing. Fire is the first concern, not because it is dramatic, but because it is efficient. It does not argue. It does not wait for permission. It moves through wood and cloth with the kind of confidence armies once admired. A single overturned lamp can erase a block more thoroughly than any siege. The guards know this. They look for smoke before they look for strangers. They listen for the wrong kind of crackle. Rome's survival tonight depends less on courage than on attention. Theft follows closely behind, not as a moral crisis, but as an inconvenience that multiplies if ignored. Stolen goods rarely make headlines. They make mornings difficult. A missing tool, a broken latch, a door left open just long enough for trust to feel foolish. The guard is not hunting criminals. He is discouraging opportunity. Opportunity is lazy. It prefers darkness without witnesses. A single visible presence often convinces it to try another street. Then there is disorder caused by drink, which Rome treats with weary familiarity. Wine has always been part of the city's rhythm. So has excess. Arguments swell, gestures grow larger than intentions, and voices forget how far sound travels at night. The guard intervenes not to punish, but to interrupt. He reminds people of their surroundings. He restores proportion. Most conflicts dissolve once someone is forced to notice themselves. These are not heroic acts. They are adjustments. They keep the night from tipping into something that would require explanation tomorrow. The guards protect Rome from problems too small to be remembered and too frequent to ignore. History does not record them because history prefers singular events. Cities survive through accumulation. There is a quiet irony in this. Rome once feared enemies worthy of monuments. Now it fears negligence. The empire that mastered conquest now masters prevention. Not prevention of collapse, but prevention of inconvenience. This is not decline, it is specialization. The guards understand that ordinary fear shapes behavior more reliably than abstract threats. People do not lie awake imagining invasion. They worry about fire spreading from a neighbor's house. They worry about losing what little they have secured. These fears are immediate. They motivate caution. The guard's presence aligns with them naturally. Rome at night does not feel endangered. It feels vulnerable in specific ways. Vulnerability invites care. People check lamps twice, they bolt doors, they walk home earlier. None of this is mandated. It is learned through experience and reinforced by quiet nights that reward prudence. The guard walks through this landscape of modest anxiety without amplifying it. He does not dramatize risk. Drama would cause panic. Panic would create more problems than it solves. Instead, he embodies steadiness. His calm suggests that the risks are manageable. That suggestion is powerful. The city depends on these small protections more than it ever depended on victory. A city can lose a battle and recover. It cannot repeatedly lose roofs to fire and continue comfortably. It cannot normalize theft without eroding trust. It cannot allow nightly disorder to accumulate without exhausting its people. The guards prevent exhaustion by keeping nights boring. Boredom is the real achievement. There is something almost humorous about how much effort is invested in ensuring that nothing memorable occurs. The guards spend their shifts preventing anecdotes. Their success leaves no trace except continuity. Rome wakes up intact and assumes this was inevitable. It rarely thanks the night for its restraint. The threats the guards manage are not noble. They are awkward. They force authority to deal with human behavior at its most ordinary. Spilled wine, unlatched doors, carelessness disguised as confidence. These do not fit into epic narratives. They fit into lived reality. Rome lives because these small things are handled repeatedly without complaint. The guards do not feel underestimated. They understand their role perfectly. They are custodians of habit. They maintain the conditions under which daily life remains possible. Without them, the city would not fall dramatically. It would fray. Fire would spread slightly more often. Theft would become slightly bolder. Disorder would linger slightly longer. Each change would be manageable on its own. Together, they would reshape the night into something heavier. Rome avoids this by paying attention early. There is wisdom here, even if it lacks poetry. The empire no longer believes that greatness protects it from mundane problems. It believes that mundane problems require dedicated attention. This belief is quieter than ideology and far more useful. The guard's night is filled with listening, listening for the wrong sound, listening for silence where sound should be, listening for laughter that has crossed into irritation. He learns the city's normal breathing pattern and notices when it stutters. None of this earns recognition. Recognition would suggest exception. Exception would imply failure elsewhere. Rome prefers to believe that the night is naturally calm, not actively managed. This belief keeps everyone comfortable. The things that keep Rome alive tonight will not be carved into stone. They will not inspire speeches. They will not even be remembered tomorrow. And that is precisely why they matter. Empires fall when they stop caring about the ordinary. Rome, in this night, still cares. It cares enough to worry about fire before invasion, about theft before conquest, about sleep before glory. The guards protect Rome from the small fears that shape everyday behavior. By doing so, they protect the city's ability to continue without thinking too hard about why it continues at all. And when morning arrives without incident, no one will say the empire survived because someone stopped a fire, discouraged a thief, or calmed a drunken argument. They will say nothing happened, which is exactly the point. Men paid to pretend tomorrow was normal. The guards are not paid to think historically. No one asks them to consider trajectories or legacies or the weight of centuries pressing toward an uncertain conclusion. Their wages are modest and specific. Stay awake, stay visible. Assume that tomorrow will arrive in a recognizable form. This assumption is not philosophical, it is practical. And it is one of the most effective tools the city has left. Rome does not require its night guards to believe in the future. It only requires them to behave as if the future will resemble the present, closely enough to justify routine. This distinction matters. Belief is fragile, behavior is reliable. The guards perform normality without needing to feel convinced by it. There is something quietly efficient about this arrangement. Expecting workers to contemplate the fate of an empire would be unreasonable and counterproductive. Contemplation invites doubt. Doubt invites hesitation. Hesitation does not keep streets calm. The city understands this instinctively. It compensates the guards not for insight, but for consistency. Tomorrow is treated as a near copy of today with minor adjustments. Slightly different weather, slightly different conversations, the same streets, the same doors. This expectation shapes how the guards walk. They do not pace as if bracing for upheaval. They pace as if preparing the ground for repetition. Pretending tomorrow will be normal is not dishonesty. It is a working agreement. Normality is defined loosely enough to survive variation. It does not promise prosperity or peace. It promises familiarity. Familiarity is enough to keep people moving forward without panic. The guards understand that their calm is contagious. If they appear unconcerned, the city relaxes. If the city relaxes, problems shrink. This is not deception, it is influence exercised gently. The guard models a future that does not require emergency measures. Rome has discovered that prophecy is a poor management tool. Predictions divide attention. They force people to imagine outcomes rather than complete tasks. The guards are insulated from prophecy by design. They are not expected to know what comes next. They are expected to behave as if what comes next will need streets intact and people rested. There is mild irony in how effective this small belief is. Not belief in destiny or greatness, but belief in continuity. A belief so modest it barely deserves the name. Tomorrow will probably be similar. Similar enough to prepare for. Similar enough to justify effort. This belief holds the city together more effectively than any warning ever could. Warnings exhaust. Normality reassures. Rome has learned to choose reassurance even when it borders on denial. The guards are professionals of the present tense. Their attention does not stretch far ahead. It does not look backward either. It stays where their feet are. This focus is not ignorance. It is discipline. The city depends on people who can ignore the noise of speculation and attend to what is immediately in front of them. Speculation is abundant elsewhere, in daylight conversations, in private anxieties, in rumors that drift through markets and baths. The night does not entertain these thoughts. The night prefers action that assumes stability. This preference shapes behavior more powerfully than argument. The guards know that tomorrow might not be identical. They are not naive. They simply refuse to let that possibility dictate tonight. If the future must interrupt, it can do so in daylight. The night is reserved for maintenance. There is a quiet humor in the seriousness with which this pretending is conducted. Everyone knows it is a performance. Everyone participates anyway. The guard acts as if tomorrow is predictable. The residents sleep as if the guard is sufficient. The administrators file reports as if absence of incident confirms success. The system holds because no one insists on questioning it all at once. Rome has learned that systems do not collapse when individuals doubt privately. They collapse when individuals act publicly on that doubt. The guards are paid to prevent that transition. Their visible normality keeps private uncertainty contained. The future is not denied. It is postponed. Postponement is a skill Rome has refined over centuries. It has postponed reform. It has postponed reckoning. It has postponed endings. Each postponement buys time. Time allows adaptation. Sometimes it even allows recovery. The guards do not consider themselves guardians of illusion. They consider themselves employees with clear instructions. Walk the route. Notice deviations. Keep things aligned with expectation. Expectation does most of the work. There is dignity in this role even if it lacks drama. The guards support the city's refusal to panic. Panic would accelerate everything Rome is trying to slow. Calm extends the present. The present is manageable. The small belief that tomorrow will be normal does not promise improvement. It promises continuity. Continuity is less inspiring but more durable. Empires survive longer on continuity than on hope. The guards embody this durability. They do not inspire speeches. They inspire sleep. Sleep replenishes patience. Patience sustains cooperation. Cooperation maintains order. Order allows the city to continue without demanding constant justification. Rome does not ask its guards to lie. It asks them to behave as if the city deserves another ordinary morning. This request is modest and powerful. It assumes value without argument. The guards accept this task without ceremony. They accept it because it is familiar. Familiar tasks do not require motivation. They require repetition. As the night deepens, their footsteps continue. Each step reinforces the idea that nothing extraordinary is required yet. This idea spreads quietly through closed doors and darkened rooms. People sleep, believing that they will wake into a city that recognizes them. This belief is fragile and unremarkable and profoundly effective. It holds the city upright longer than prophecy ever could. Tomorrow may arrive differently, but tonight is protected by men who are paid to behave as if it will not. And for Rome, for now, that is enough. When order became routine, order in Rome no longer arrives with a raised voice. It does not lean on threats or remind anyone of consequences. It arrives quietly, disguised as familiarity, settling into daily life so completely that most people stop noticing it altogether. This is not because order has weakened. It is because it has succeeded too well. Fear once had its uses. It sharpened attention. It made boundaries clear. But fear is tiring, and Rome has learned that exhaustion erodes loyalty faster than leniency ever could. So order changes shape. It becomes routine. It embeds itself into behavior rather than emotion. People follow patterns not because they are afraid to break them, but because breaking them feels unnecessary. The city functions because everyone knows what to do, even when no one remembers exactly why it must be done that way. Shops close at familiar hours. Streets empty in predictable sequences. Gates follow schedules that are rarely questioned. The system no longer asks for understanding. It asks only for participation. This is how Rome keeps moving without discussion. Discussion would imply uncertainty. Uncertainty would slow things down. Routine bypasses both. It carries people forward without requiring belief. The guards are part of this machinery, but they are not its origin. They reinforce what already exists. Their presence reminds the city of habits it would probably follow anyway. Authority here is supportive rather than commanding. It nudges rather than pushes. There is something faintly ironic in how disciplined this arrangement is. From the outside, it might look like decline, a city going through motions without passion. From the inside, it feels like relief. Passion demands energy. Energy has become precious. Routine conserves it. Rome does not fall into chaos when fear fades. It falls into schedules. These schedules become so dependable that deviation feels strange. People comply because compliance is easier than improvisation. Improvisation carries risk. Risk invites attention. Attention disrupts sleep. Order no longer needs justification. Justification would require explanation. Explanation would require someone to remember the original reasons. Rome has outlived many of its reasons. What remains are procedures that work well enough to keep the city intact. The guards notice this shift most clearly in how rarely they need to intervene. People regulate themselves. Arguments end sooner. Movement feels intentional rather than reactive. The city has internalized its own rules. This internalization is the quiet triumph of administration. There is a subtle humor in the seriousness with which these routines are maintained, even when no one is watching closely. Doors are locked, even when no one expects trouble. Lamps are trimmed, even when fuel seems sufficient. These acts are performed almost automatically, as if the city itself were guiding hands through muscle memory. Order born from fear is loud. Order born from habit is silent. Silence is often mistaken for weakness. Rome understands that silence can also be a sign of deep integration. When systems work without announcement, they have reached maturity. The decline of empires is rarely chaotic in its early stages. It is methodical. Offices continue to open, records continue to be kept, shifts continue to be filled. The machinery does not grind to a halt, it hums steadily, even as the reasons for its creation grow distant. Rome's nights demonstrate this perfectly. Nothing dramatic announces that something is wrong. Everything operates with reassuring competence. The danger lies not in failure, but in how well the system functions without reflection. When order becomes routine, it no longer invites evaluation. The guards are not asked to question this. Questioning would interfere with the smoothness of the night. They are asked to uphold what exists. What exists feels solid enough to trust. Trust reduces anxiety. Reduced anxiety keeps the city calm. There is dignity in this calm, even if it carries a quiet risk. Systems that run themselves do not notice when their environment changes. They adapt slowly, but slow adaptation is still adaptation. Rome has survived worse by adjusting gradually rather than reacting violently. The routines that govern the city are not empty. They are full of accumulated decisions made by people who once cared deeply about outcomes. Those decisions remain encoded in behavior long after the debates that produce them have faded. The city remembers through action rather than words. The guards walk through this memory nightly. They trace paths shaped by centuries of trial and correction. They do not need to understand the origin of every rule to benefit from its effect. The city has already tested these patterns extensively. Order has become so familiar that it feels natural, almost biological, like breathing, like sleep. People follow it without gratitude or resistance. Gratitude would imply choice. Resistance would imply dissatisfaction. Most people feel neither. They feel carried. There is something gently unsettling about how peaceful this looks. Peace can be mistaken for health. Routine can be mistaken for resilience. Rome balances on this ambiguity comfortably, perhaps too comfortably. But comfort is persuasive. It keeps the city from asking difficult questions at inconvenient hours. The guards sense that their role has shifted from enforcement to affirmation. They affirm that the routines still function. They confirm that nothing has slipped far enough to demand revision. This affirmation is quiet but constant. Rome does not collapse in noise. It does not announce its transitions. It reorganizes itself subtly with remarkable discipline. Decline, when it comes, will not shatter order. It will inherit it. For now, order remains intact, smooth, almost elegant in its predictability. The city sleeps not because it is afraid, but because it is accustomed to sleeping at this hour. Habit has replaced fear as the engine of stability. The guards continue their rounds through streets that know exactly how quiet they are supposed to be. The city moves through the night like a well-rehearsed routine, confident, not because it is strong, but because it is familiar. And familiarity in Rome has always been one of the most powerful forces of all. The empire that didn't stay awake. No one on night duty believes they are guarding a final moment. That kind of awareness belongs to historians, not to people whose work depends on repetition. The guards step into the dark with the same expectations they carried last night and the night before that. This night feels familiar enough to require no special attention. Familiarity is persuasive. It convinces people that continuity is the default state of things. The empire does not stay awake out of anxiety. It stays awake out of habit. Staying awake forever would imply suspicion. Suspicion would imply that something has changed. The city sees no evidence of that tonight. Lamps behave as expected. Streets empty on schedule. Doors close with the same restrained confidence they always have. Everything looks ordinary, and ordinary has proven reliable. The guards do not search for signs of endings. Endings are abstract. They search for deviations. A sound out of place, a shadow where none should be. Most nights offer none. This absence becomes data. If nothing unusual occurs, then nothing unusual must be happening. This logic feels sound when repeated often enough. Rome's confidence rests on sameness. Each night that resembles the last reinforces the assumption that tomorrow will follow suit. This assumption is not naive. It is empirical. It is built from hundreds of nights that passed without demanding reinterpretation. Empires learn to trust patterns long before they learn to question them. There is something gently ironic about how carefully the city prepares for what it expects rather than what it cannot imagine. The guards are well trained for repetition. They know routes by heart. They anticipate boredom. They prepare for the predictable. They are not prepared for moments that announce themselves as historic. Those moments rarely announce themselves anyway. History does not knock. It drifts. It changes direction quietly, like someone choosing a different street without explaining why. The guards are not watching for that kind of movement. They are watching for trouble that behaves badly. History behaves politely. It waits until no one is looking closely. The empire does not miss its turning point because it is careless. It misses it because turning points rarely feel like interruptions at the time. They feel like continuation with minor variation. The night unfolds as expected. The city sleeps. The guards walk. Nothing insists on interpretation. Rome's nights have taught its people that staying awake beyond necessity is wasteful. The city prefers to rest and let tomorrow arrive on its own terms. Vigilance has limits. Those limits are practical rather than philosophical. You cannot guard against everything without exhausting yourself into failure. The guards accept this trade-off. They know that alertness must be rationed. If every night is treated as critical, no night will be manageable. Calm is a resource. Rome spends it carefully. There is quiet humor in imagining an empire capable of conquering continents choosing not to stay awake for its own turning points. But empires do not operate on awareness. They operate on momentum. Momentum carries systems forward, even when direction shifts slightly. By the time the shift is noticed, it feels like it has always been there. The guards embody this momentum. Their steps follow paths worn smooth by expectation. Each step confirms that the world remains navigable. That confirmation is enough to send people back to sleep when they stir briefly in the dark. Rome does not fail to notice change because it is inattentive. It fails to notice because change does not present itself as danger. It presents itself as adjustment. Adjustments do not demand alarms. They demand accommodation. Accommodation happens quietly. The city has lived through enough crises to know that most nights are not decisive. Treating them as such would be exhausting. Instead, Rome invests in continuity and accepts the risk that continuity carries. This investment has paid dividends for centuries. It is difficult to abandon a strategy that has worked so well. The guards are comfortable with this arrangement. Comfort does not imply ignorance. It implies trust. Trust that the city will signal when something truly requires disruption. Trust that most nights will remain what they appear to be. There is something unsettling about how effective this trust is. It keeps the empire functioning smoothly, even as circumstances shift beneath the surface. The night does not reveal fractures. It conceals them beneath routine. History prefers hindsight. In hindsight, it will be obvious that this night resembled the last one too closely. That sameness will be interpreted as blindness. But blindness requires the presence of something visible. Nothing visible demands attention tonight. The guards complete their rounds without ceremony. They do not feel that they are standing at a threshold. Thresholds are concepts applied after crossing. In the moment, there is only another stretch of street, another familiar corner, another lamp holding steady. Rome does not stay awake for its own transformations. It trusts that they will happen gradually without demanding immediate response. This trust is neither heroic nor foolish. It is administrative. The empire that does not stay awake is not negligent. It is tired. Tired systems rely on continuity because continuity is easier to manage than uncertainty. Rome has learned this lesson well. As the night deepens, nothing insists on urgency. The guards continue their work assuming that the night will conclude as it always has. That assumption spreads quietly through sleeping households. History may be changing direction. The city does not feel the turn yet. The streets remain recognizable. The lamps remain lit. The guards remain at their posts. And so the empire sleeps through another night, unaware, not because it is careless, but because nothing has demanded that it wake up. Not yet. After the guard walked on. When the guard's footsteps leave the street, nothing dramatic replaces them. The stone remains where it has always been. The doorways do not sigh. The lamps do not flicker in protest. The city does not pause to notice the absence. Rome continues because continuation has become its most practiced skill. There is no single moment of loss. Loss implies awareness, and awareness requires contrast. What happens instead is a transfer so gradual that it feels like nothing at all. One form of watching gives way to another. One routine loosens while another quietly tightens. The city does not register this as change. It registers it as adjustment. Rome does not vanish. Cities rarely do. They rearrange responsibility. They redistribute attention. They allow older systems to thin out while newer ones take on weight without ceremony. The guard walking on does not signal abandonment. It signals that his particular way of standing there is no longer required in quite the same form. The street remains calm because calm has been learned. It does not depend entirely on a single presence anymore. People have absorbed the rhythm deeply enough to carry it themselves. Doors are closed because it is time. Lamps are trimmed because that is what one does. Sleep arrives without negotiation. There is something quietly ironic in how smoothly this happens. From a distance, later observers will search for a collapse, a failure, a moment when Rome stopped being Rome. They will look for raised voices or sudden silence. They will be disappointed. What they will find instead is continuity shifting hands. The guard once represented assurance. Now assurance has become distributed. It lives in habits rather than uniforms. It survives in expectation rather than enforcement. Rome has not lost order. It has decentralized it. This transition is not celebrated. Celebration would imply victory or defeat. Neither applies. The city simply learns to rely less on visible guardians and more on embedded behavior. This feels like maturity to those living through it. It feels like erosion only in hindsight. The guard's absence is not immediate, it is partial. Roots shorten, pauses lengthen, the presence becomes lighter. Nothing calls attention to this lightness. The city adapts unconsciously, the way a body adjusts to a familiar ache by shifting posture slightly rather than naming it. Rome has always excelled at this kind of adjustment. It does not panic when roles evolve. It allows them to fade into one another. Administrative oversight replaces physical presence. Community expectation replaces constant supervision. The city remains watched, just not in the way it once was. There is a temptation to frame this as neglect. It is not. Neglect implies indifference. Rome is not indifferent. It is economical. It allocates attention where it believes attention will matter most. When a method proves unnecessary, it is quietly retired. The streets notice this before anyone else. They grow accustomed to fewer footsteps. They do not miss them. Streets are practical. They exist to be passed through, not to be guarded ceremonially. As long as movement remains orderly, they accept the change. The people notice later, if at all. Most never do. Their nights remain uneventful. Their mornings still arrive. Absence only becomes meaningful when it produces consequence. Here, consequence is delayed. Rome's endurance has always relied on this delay. The city understands that immediate reactions create instability. Gradual transitions preserve appearance. Appearance matters. It keeps confidence intact, even when structure shifts beneath it. The guard walking on does not create a vacuum. Vacuums attract attention. What replaces him is diffusion. Responsibility spreads thinly across many hands. Each hand holds only a small part, light enough not to feel burdensome. Together they maintain balance. There is quiet humor in how unspectacular this is. An empire famous for its drama exits its old habits without applause. No one marks the last time a certain route is walked with the same frequency. No one records the final night when a familiar figure stood in a familiar place. Those details are too ordinary to feel significant. Rome does not disappear because disappearance requires absence. What happens instead is overlap. Old systems linger alongside new ones until the difference becomes academic. The city remains recognizable long after its methods have changed. The guard's way of watching belonged to a time when visibility reassured. As conditions shift, reassurance comes from predictability rather than presence. People trust that nothing urgent will happen because nothing urgent has happened for a long time. This trust is fragile and effective. The city continues to function not because it is guarded in the old way, but because it has internalized the guard's role. People watch themselves. Neighbors notice smoke. Voices lower naturally. The work once done by a few is now done lightly by many. Rome has always understood that survival is not about holding on rigidly. It is about letting go slowly enough that no one stumbles. The guard walking on is part of that letting go. There is no mourning for the method that fades. Mourning would suggest attachment. Rome is attached to outcomes, not techniques. If the outcome remains acceptable, the method can change without regret. Later, much later, this moment will be described as a turning point. That description will be inaccurate. Turning points feel sharp. This feels smooth. It feels like continuity, doing what continuity does best, which is disguising change as familiarity. The city remains. The streets remain. Life continues at a pace that feels almost intentional in its steadiness. Rome has not stopped being watched. It has stopped being watched in the old way. And because this transition happens quietly, without disruption or announcement, the city does what it has always done best in moments like these. It goes on. A city that slept because it had to. Rome does not fall asleep to provide atmosphere for history. It sleeps because morning has expectations, and expectations are demanding in very ordinary ways. Doors must open, water must be heated, work must resume with minimal confusion. The city rests not as an artistic gesture, but as a practical decision made collectively and without discussion. Sleep here is not symbolic. It is logistical. The night guard exists inside this logic. He is not stationed to rescue an empire from destiny. Destiny is far too abstract to require standing in the cold. He is stationed to make sure that nothing interrupts the quiet chain of cause and effect that leads from one day into the next. His success is measured by how little anyone notices him at all. Rome does not expect salvation from its guards. It expects continuity, a small extension of normality, another night that behaves itself, another morning that arrives without explanation. This expectation shapes everything. The city does not hold its breath waiting for collapse or renewal. Holding breath is inefficient. Instead, it exhales slowly, night after night, trusting that breath will return in the morning because it always has. There is a quiet absurdity in how anti-dramatic this ending is. Later centuries will search for signs, omens, decisive hours. They will imagine thunder, flames, final speeches delivered to empty streets. But Rome offers none of that. What it offers instead is a shift change completed without comment. The guard hands over responsibility not with ceremony, but with familiarity, a nod, a brief exchange of practical information, nothing worth recording, nothing that feels historic. The city continues to function because it prefers function over narrative. Empires do not end the way stories do. Stories require closure. Cities require continuity. Rome chooses continuity for as long as it can manage it. When continuity changes shape, it does so quietly, passing responsibility forward rather than dropping it. The guard's role has always been modest. He stands between the city and interruption, not invasion, not apocalypse. Interruption, the kind that forces people to wake suddenly and wonder whether the routine they trust has failed them. His presence reassures the city that routine remains intact. Rome sleeps because it trusts that reassurance just enough. This trust is not blind. It is experienced. It has been reinforced by thousands of uneventful nights. Each night that passes without incident becomes evidence that the next one probably will too. Probability replaces prophecy. Rome governs itself by likelihood rather than hope. The guard is part of this probability. His footsteps do not promise safety. They promise effort. Someone cared enough to show up. Someone believed the night deserved attention even if nothing happened. That belief is contagious. People sleep more deeply knowing that the city is still being minded, even if they do not consciously think about who is doing the minding. Consciousness is unnecessary. Habit carries the feeling forward. There is something gently ironic in how little this resembles the Rome people imagine. No marble speeches, no dramatic last stands, just a city that has learned how to lower its expectations without lowering its standards. The standard now is simple. Tomorrow should resemble today closely enough to feel manageable. The guard does not judge this ambition. He lives inside it. His task is not to question whether the empire deserves another day. His task is to help it receive one. Rome does not sleep out of ignorance. It sleeps out of necessity. A city that stays awake forever becomes brittle. Brittle things break loudly. Rome prefers softness. Softness absorbs pressure without announcing failure. The final lesson of the night is not about loss. It is about maintenance. Empires do not collapse when maintenance stops suddenly. They fade when maintenance becomes distributed so widely that no one feels responsible enough to announce change. The guard never feels like the last of anything. He feels like one more link in a chain that stretches backward beyond memory and forward beyond prediction. That chain does not snap. It thins. It becomes lighter. Eventually it is replaced by something else without anyone agreeing on the moment. This is why Rome does not end with a sound. Sound attracts attention. Attention invites interpretation. Interpretation creates myths. Rome has never needed help creating myths. It needs help getting through the night. The city that sleeps because it has to is not weak. It is disciplined in a quiet way. It knows when to rest. It knows when effort produces diminishing returns. It understands that survival often depends on choosing not to dramatize what can be postponed. The guard exists to postpone. He postpones disorder. He postpones panic. He postpones the realization that things are changing in ways that cannot be managed by standing in the same place forever. Each postponement buys time. Time allows adjustment. Rome adjusts slowly, sometimes too slowly. But slow adjustment is still adjustment. It keeps the city recognizable to itself. Morning will arrive without fanfare. People will wake with practical concerns. The guard's night will dissolve into memory without distinction. That is how it is meant to work. Empires do not end in thunder. They end in silence. Organized carefully enough to feel natural. They end in routines that continue without asking why they exist. They end in shift changes that feel ordinary until long after they have passed. Rome sleeps not because it is unaware, but because it has learned that staying awake forever is not wisdom. Wisdom sometimes looks like trusting that the world will still be there when you open your eyes. The guard understands this even if he never articulates it. He walks his last steps of the night knowing that the city behind him is intact enough to carry itself forward for a while longer. And so the night closes not with an ending, but with a continuation that no one feels compelled to name, which may be the quietest ending of all.